Zajímám tě?
Důvěřuješ mi?
Jak poznáš, co potřebuju?
A jak ses ty naučil číst?
Fórum sebeřízeného vzdělávání.
Welcome, Peter. I would like to welcome you here on the Forum of Self-Directed Education. We are very pleased that you are here with us after 7 years that you've been in Prague. So the stage is yours, and welcome.
Okay, well, thank you. I'm very happy to be here. I wish I were there in person, but this will have to do. So my talk is entitled Biological Foundations of Self-Directed Education. I only have 30 minutes, and I recognize that somebody is remarkably doing a simultaneous translation, so I can't talk too fast. I hope you have the handout that I sent. If you've got that, it would be a good idea to have it in front of you, because it'll help make it more clear where I am going in this talk, especially as I will be moving rather quickly over a number of topics. So biological foundations of self-directed education, I have to begin by saying what I mean by self-directed education. And even before that, I have to say, well, what is education? What do I mean by the word education? So most people, when they use the word education, they're referring actually to schooling. I do not equate education with schooling. I do not equate it with how many diplomas you have, how many years of school you had, how many tests you passed, or anything like that. I define education in a way that I think is more meaningful. I think it gets at the root of what we really want education to be. I define education as the sum of everything that a person learns that enables that person to live a satisfying and meaningful and moral life. In other words, an education should be something that prepares a person for life, prepares them for a happy life, prepares them for a productive life, prepares them for a life in which they give more to the world than they take. I regard a person as well educated if they have the capacities to do those things. So given that definition of education, then self-directed education with small letters, SDE, self-directed education, is education, that part of a person's education, that derives from that person's self-chosen activities and life experiences, whether or not those activities were deliberately chosen for the purpose of education. Self-directed education can include organized classes or lessons if they're freely chosen by the learner, but most self-directed education does not occur that way. For children especially, most self-directed education comes from freely chosen play, exploration, observation, and participation in everyday life. If you think about it, I think that you will realize that no matter how much actual schooling you've had, to the degree that you are educated, most of that education comes from what I've just described as self-directed education. Self-directed education necessarily leads people, different individuals, along different paths, so the paths may often overlap. You and I have different ideas of what would make for a meaningful and satisfying life. We're not identical to one another. And so our self-directed education would go along somewhat different paths. And yet there would be things that you and I agree are important to both of our education. And so in that sense, they would overlap with one another. Self-directed education can be contrasted with imposed education. Imposed education is that which is forced upon individuals regardless of their desire for it, and is motivated by systems of rewards and punishments, as occurs in conventional schools. Imposed education is generally aimed at enhancing conformity rather than uniqueness. It's based on the assumption that There are certain things that everybody is supposed to learn, and there are certain ways they can learn it, and we're going to make sure everybody learns it by requiring that they go through those ways that we believe will lead them to learn it. So imposed education generally produces rather shallow learning because the person is not personally invested, involved in it. The person hasn't taken it to heart. And the learning is aimed principally at passing tests rather than at really growing the self as an individual. So a lot of time in imposed education is imposed schooling, I should say, is wasted in terms of education because it doesn't really result in the long-term internalization of the values and ideas and skills that are important to that person's development. Now, I want to distinguish between self-directed education with capital SDE and self-directed education with the small letters SDE. The small letters is the more generic term, refers to the self-directed education that all of us have had and are continuing throughout our life. Self-directed education with capital letters refers to that situation where a family has decided that their child will not be subjected to imposed education. All of their education will be self-directed in that sense. All of their education will be internally motivated by the learner rather than forced upon the learner by coercion, by forced curriculum. The learning will come from natural life experiences, and from the curiosity and play and other internal motives of the person learning. So that's what I mean by self-directed education. Now, why does self-directed education work? I'm going to point out that it does work. I've been long doing research on people who've been involved with self-directed education. I can tell you it works. They become educated without imposed schooling. So why does it work? It works because all of us are born with certain internal instincts that serve the purpose of education. These are the intrinsic motivators that make us learn about the world that we're growing up in, make us learn about ourselves, make us learn the skills that are going to be important for the life we want to live in the world that we're growing up in. So what are these internal motivators? What are these instinctive drives for self-directed education? They're actually not, it actually should be no mystery about them. They're almost obvious. The first one is curiosity. If you're following the handout, I'm on B on the handout where I've listed the educative instincts or educative drives. The first one is curiosity, which is the drive to find out about the world, to find out things, discover things, what's out there, and what can I do with it? Aristotle began his famous treatise on metaphysics, on the origin of knowledge, with the words, human beings are naturally curious about things. Nothing could be truer. We are intensely curious from the moment we're born until the time we die, unless that curiosity is somehow driven out of us. Children, little children, as soon as they're born, are already looking around, trying to figure out the world around them. As soon as they can move, they're moving around to try to get at things, to explore them. Once they have language, they may be asking questions, and they're certainly overhearing and listening to what others say as a way of learning about the world around them. So curiosity is the drive to acquire information and knowledge, the kind of information and knowledge that will help you to live ultimately a meaningful and satisfying and moral life. The second drive is playfulness. So curiosity serves the function of acquiring knowledge. Play serves the function of acquiring skills. If you think about it, there's two aspects to education: acquiring knowledge, information, and acquiring skills, the ability to do things and do things reasonably well. So play is doing things. Play is active. Play isn't just looking at things and trying to figure things out. It's actually doing things out there in the world. So children all are born curious, and they all are born with a very strong drive to play. And anthropologists who study children throughout the world point out that wherever children are observed, they play in all the ways that I have listed on your handout under playfulness. These are children, this is true if they are in a culture where they have ample opportunity to play, not necessarily in a culture where we are taking up so much of their time with other things that they don't really have enough time to play. But in cultures where they have ample opportunity to play, children play in all of the ways that I have listed on the handout. They play in physical ways. They climb, chase one another, they rough and tumble, they engage in all sorts of vigorous activities, largely outdoors. This is how children develop their physical bodies. It's how they learn to move gracefully. And as part of that physical play, they also play in risky ways. They climb trees, maybe higher than their mom would want them to. They dive off of cliffs into pools of water. They slide rapidly down hills. They do all kinds of risky things. Turns out other young mammals do this too in their play. And why are they doing that? This is nature's way of ensuring that young mammals, including young humans, acquire courage. This is sort of playing with a modest amount of danger that you can handle, but still induces a certain level of fear. And you are learning to deal with fear. I can feel this fear, this thrilling feel of fear that I can manage. And I'm learning when I do these things that I can manage this fear. And that makes me more confident about going through life. And at some point, if some real emergency happens, if I've played in these ways as a child, I'm more capable of managing the emergency. I don't fall apart because I'm afraid of my own fear. Children everywhere also play in ways that have to do, so the ways that I should say, the ways I've just described are ways of playing that have been found in all young mammals, not just human beings, but apparently all young mammals play in these kinds of ways. All young mammals have physical bodies that need to be developed. All mammals have a need to develop courage so they don't fall apart from fear. But the next things I've listed on the handout, ways of playing, have to do with uniquely human skills. We are the animal that talks. We have language. How do children learn language? They learn it in play. Their first cooing and babbling is always playful. As they begin to use words, they're using them in a playful context. Their first words are never used instrumentally to ask for anything. They're just used playfully. As children get older and begin to play with one another, they use words to coordinate their play. They negotiate their play. They discuss, they argue, they talk about what's fair and not fair. They're developing great skills in language, in dialogue, in argument as they're playing with one another. Children everywhere play imaginative games. We are the animal, as far as we know, the only animal that's capable of imagination. And children in their imaginative play, their fantasy play, their play that witches and dragons, and I would even argue in all of their play, they're bringing into their play a great deal of imagination. They're exercising their ability to imagine. And as part of imagination comes hypothetical reasoning. Hypothetical reasoning is the kind of reasoning where you say, suppose this is true, then what else has to be true? That's hypothetical deductive reasoning. And even little children are practicing that all the time. So a little child, one child might say that might point to the kitchen table and say, oh, that's a bridge. And another child, these could be 3 and 4 and 5-year-old children, another child says, there's a troll under the bridge. Well, this, of course, is imagination. And then maybe another child says, well, if there's a troll under the bridge, we better not go under the bridge. Or another child says, well, if there's a troll under the bridge, we better give the troll a cookie so it doesn't eat us. This is hypothetical deductive reasoning. imagine this is a bridge. Imagine there's a troll under. That's hypothetical. What are the logical deductions of it? Well, we better not go under the bridge, or we better make sure that the troll is well fed so the troll doesn't eat us. This is how children practice the highest order of human reasoning in their play. We are the animal that thinks logically. And as I just described, as part of imaginative games, children are learning to think logically, but they're also thinking logically in many other ways. Whenever children are playing, they are often engaged in dialogue about what they're playing, and they're practicing logic. Imagine little girls playing that they're going to the ball at the king's palace, and they're in the dress-up corner of a kindergarten, and one of them says, I get to be the princess. And another one says, but you were the princess last time. And so now it's my turn to be the princess. And so now they're having a discussion about it. Well, this is logic. They're presenting reasons. They're presenting arguments about why they should get what they want in the course of play. They're also, of course, learning how to compromise as they do this, because if they can't find a compromise, then the play ends. But they want the play to keep going. We are the animal that has to follow rules. We can't just abide by our whims and instincts. We have to abide by the norms and rules of the society that we live in, at least to some degree. We might press those norms and rules in some ways, but if we went too far out of them, human society couldn't work. So children in play are always learning how to follow the rules of whatever it is they're playing. All sorts of play has at least implicit rules. Whenever you're playing something, you're playing at something. That means that it's guided, there's bounded, there's a certain thing you're doing, and you would be outside of those boundaries if you're not doing that thing in accordance with the agreed upon way of doing it, especially if it's social play, or your own chosen way of doing it if it's individual play. So children are always learning to follow rules. And in every society, some games have very formal rules. They're explicitly stated rules. In our culture, they may even be written down. So in those games, children are learning to follow what we might call laws in our larger culture. They're also learning how to create rules and change rules, because children in play learn, well, we can make the game more fun by changing the rule in this way, and we can include more people if we include it in this way or that way. So they're learning really basic principles of democratic governance, among other things, in their play. We are the animal with opposable thumbs that's capable of building things. We have, ever since we've been human beings, we have built the environments that we live in. We build tools for hunting and gathering, and now for other things as well. We build shelters, we build clothing, we build dugout canoes and other means of transportation. We've always done this. So it's no surprise that children all over the world play at building things. They're practicing the skill of building things, using those opposable thumbs, using the parts of the brain that are involved and figuring out what it is you're going to build, and then following that and translating it into the movements that actually result in building the thing that you have in mind. We are the animal that uses tools. This is related to the drive to build things, but we're the animal that uses tools. And in all cultures, anthropologists have found that children are very much attracted to whatever is the most prevalent tools of their culture. So children in hunter-gatherer cultures are attracted to bows and arrows and digging sticks and fire. Children in agricultural cultures are attracted to agricultural equipment and play with those things and learn how to use them. In our culture today, what are children most attracted to? Of course, they're most attracted to computers, which are obviously the most important tool in our culture today. No matter what you're going to do in life, you're going to be involved with computers, and every child can see that, and in their gut, they know, well, this is the tool that I better figure out how to use, I better play with, I better get good at. So in whatever culture children are growing up in, they're attracted to the tools of the culture. This is instinctive. This is all part of the endowments that came from natural selection. And then finally on the list, I say children play socially, no matter how else they are playing, whether they're playing in physical ways or with language, or they're playing imaginative games, or they're playing with logic, or they're playing games with explicit rules, or they're playing at building things, or playing with tools. They most of all want to be playing with other children while they're doing that. Not always. Sometimes you want to play by yourself because you don't want to have to compromise in what you're doing. But children come into the world with this very strong innate drive to want to play with other children, and especially to do so away from adults, because they don't want adults to interfere, because natural selection endowed them with that drive, because it's very important growing up that children learn how to deal with peers without an authority figure solving their problems for them. So children tend to avoid adults when they're playing and to play with other children away from adults. This is very important. It's unfortunate that in our culture, especially in the United States today, we are depriving children of that kind of play because we've more or less got adults around all the time. So so I've talked about curiosity, I've talked about playfulness. I'm going to be quicker on the next things on the list. Sociability. I've already said that we are extraordinarily social beings. We absolutely depend upon our interactions with other people for our survival and certainly for our reproduction. And so children are naturally sociable. That's why one of the reasons they want to play socially with other children. But when I list sociability here as part of the learning instinct, the point I want to make is children are curious about everything, but they're especially curious about other people. They pay attention to what other people are doing, including older people. They want to know what other people are doing. They want to know what other people are doing. They watch, they listen. You will affect your child much more by example in terms of what you are saying to other adults, what you are doing in your real life, than you will by any lectures to your child. Your child is watching you, but your child is also watching and listening to many other people and acquiring different ways of being, different ways of understanding, acquiring some of the information that you don't have to learn by direct experience, because you can learn them from other people by watching what their skills are, what they seem to know, and acquiring what they know from that. The fourth thing I listed on here is willfulness, the drive to take charge of your own life. What an important drive that is. Ultimately, the whole purpose of childhood is to grow ever more independent, ever more capable of doing more things by yourself and needing less and less help. So already by the age of 2, children are already wanting to do things by themselves if they can. They don't want you to help them if they can do it themselves. They don't want you to always tell them what to do. They want to do what they want to do. And sometimes that can be an annoyance, and sometimes we get angry about it. But we have to think of that as a very healthy drive. That's really the child saying, I want to take charge of my own life. And as children get older, that willfulness becomes more and more valuable to their life. And as they get older, they should be able to take more and more charge of their own life, do more and more things for themselves. That's part of growing up. That's part of the drive to educate yourself. What is it that I need to know in order to be able to take charge of my own life? And how do I learn by taking charge of my own life? The fifth thing I listed here is planfulness. We're the animal that's capable of thinking ahead, making plans for the future, whether that's for a few minutes in the future or a long time in the future. Children, as soon as they're capable of playing, they are capable of planning, because play requires a plan. When you are playing something, you are playing something. That means you've decided to play something. That's a plan. I'm going to make a sandcastle, or I'm going to I'm going to make a tower from Legos, or I'm going to be a witch in a fantasy game that we're playing. And then you follow through with that. That's making a plan and following through with the plan. And as children get a little bit older, they begin to plan a little farther ahead. So you can maybe imagine children making a sandcastle, and then they're being called away for lunch, and one of them says to the other, well, after lunch, let's come back and continue making the sandcastle. That's a longer-term plan. Now, they may or may not remember to do that, but as they get older, they'll be more and more likely to remember what their plans are and to follow through on them. And my observations of children who grow up with self-directed education is that by the time they're teenagers, they begin to make long-term plans. How am I going to make a living as I go through life? What do I need to do to prepare myself to make a living? So that ability to plan grows through experience with having control of your own life, having the opportunity to make plans. If all the plans are being made for you, then you may not develop that as fully as you should, the ability to make plans and plan your own future and thereby take control of your own future as you grow up. And then the sixth thing I listed is the drive to grow up, to be an adult. Peter Pan, the child who never wanted to grow up, is an adult fantasy, not a child's fantasy. All children want to grow up. All normal children want to grow up. They want to become adults. They want to become powerful. They want to become big. They like to play powerful and adult roles if you watch them play. And they are attuned to adults, and they're looking at adults as well as to older children to see what is my next stage in life and how do I prepare myself for that stage in life. So these are the things. Now, if you think of all those things, they're almost obvious. I'm sure you know that children are like this if you watch children at all. But maybe you haven't thought about this in terms of education. If it now seems less surprising, I think, if you consider all of this, that children are capable of educating themselves. They come with these powerful self-educative instincts. So now I want to go on to C, evidence that self-directed education works. This has been the focus of much of my own research. I don't have time to describe it in any detail here, but as you note on the back of your handout, I've got a lot of references, including articles about this research. But one of my early studies was of the graduates of a school called the Sudbury Valley School. So this was a school founded in 1968. So it's now been around for 55 years. It has many hundreds of graduates. It takes students from the age of 4 on through typical high school age, on through 17, 18 years old. But it offers no curriculum. It does not test students. It does not force any curriculum on students. Students are free all day long at school to follow their own interests, as long as they abide by the rules of the school, which are rules of the sort that any community needs to keep order in the school and prevent people from interfering with one another's activities. And those rules are made democratically by a vote of the school meeting in which students, no matter what their age, and faculty staff members, no matter what their age, each have one vote. That's the way the school operates. I got fascinated by the school many years ago and conducted a study of the graduates. And it's actually that study that turned me in the direction of wanting to know how it is that children educate themselves. Because what I found was, lo and behold, here was a group of young adults who grew up without what we think of as school. They were playing, they were exploring, they were following their own interests, they were hanging out with one another. They were doing pretty much all the things that you would think children would do when they're free to do what they want. And yet they were growing up to be remarkably capable of adults. Those who wanted to go on to higher education, to college or university, didn't seem to have any difficulty getting in, even if they hadn't taken any courses prior to that. They had gone on into the whole range of careers. They were generally very happy with their careers, much more so, I think, than the typical person is happy with their careers. Later on, along with Gina Riley, I did a study of grown unschoolers. So these are people who do self-directed education in a homeschooling context. So they're registered as homeschoolers, which is perfectly legal in the United States, but they do not have any forced curriculum. Their parents support their self-directed endeavors. The parents connect them to a community, to a larger community, and in that way support them, but don't require them to study anything, don't test them on anything. And what we found in that study was very similar to what we found with the graduates of the Sudbury Valley School. What we found all in all, if I were to summarize briefly, is that these people, when you ask them what are the benefits to them of self-directed education, first of all, almost all of them were very happy that they had chosen that route and felt that it was a great benefit to them. They felt they were more responsible than they otherwise would have been because they had to take responsibility for themselves growing up. They felt they were more self-directed. They were capable of figuring things out themselves. They felt they were more creative because in some sense they had to create their own activities as they were growing up. And maybe most interestingly, they were in careers for the large part that they truly enjoyed. Why? Because they played and discovered what they love to do in play. That's part of what play is. It's doing what you love to do, becoming good at that. And through their play, and through their planning, they developed an idea that, well, maybe I can make a living doing what I really love to do, doing whatever it is that I love to play at. And we found that that over 50% of them, there was a direct relationship between what they played at as a child and what they were doing now as an adults in a career. And in my writings, I give many examples of that. So now I'll take about just about 4 more minutes to go through D on the handout. I don't have time to elaborate on this, just as I haven't had time to elaborate on anything else on this handout, but I hope you're getting at least a taste of the argument here. So what is the optimal context for self-directed education? What's the responsibility of adults in self-directed education? And I would say that the responsibility of adults is to set up the kind of environment that optimizes children's ability to educate themselves. So these are the characteristics that I think are part of that optimal environment. The first is the social expectation and reality that education is children's responsibility. If you act as if your child will become educated by doing what you tell the child to do, then the child may lose the initial belief that children all come into the world with, that education is my responsibility. They'll maybe stop thinking about their own self and their own drive to learn and so on and so forth, and subject themselves to just doing what they're told to do. So it's very important in the environment for self-directed education that there be no pretense that you, the adult, are responsible for educating them. No, you're there to help if they ask for help, but you're not there to ensure that they learn what they want to learn. That's their job. That's their task. So the second characteristic is unlimited freedom to play, explore, and pursue their own interests. You need lots of time to do this. You need time to explore. You need the time to play at a wide variety of things, figuring out what you like to do. You need time to immerse yourself in those kinds of playful things and hobbies that you become really interested in order to educate yourself. You need opportunity. The third, you need opportunity to play with the tools of the culture, whatever are the most important tools of the culture. And of course, in our culture, there's quite a number of tools, and different people may choose different tools. Everybody's going to choose computers. Of course they are. It's the most common tool. But some people are also going to want to use the cooking equipment or the woodworking equipment, the sporting equipment, and so on and so forth. So you want to be in an environment where you've got the kinds of tools or able to provide in one way or another, or get the child to the place where the tools are available for whatever the child wants to do. And by playing with the tools, I mean use those tools in a creative way, not just follow some pat set of instructions as you might do in a typical school about how to use the tool. But once you learn to basic safety of the tool and the basic capacities of the tool, then to really play with the tool, do your own thing, make that tool a part of you in some sense. And then finally, fourth, access to a variety of caring adults who are helpers, not judges. Children sometimes need to go to an adult for one reason or another, sometimes for advice, sometimes for comfort. They also need adults kind of as models of what it is to be an adult. And the ideal setting, there is more than one adult, more than two adults. No matter how wonderful your mom or dad are, they don't represent all the adults out there, and you want to have more of a sense of various kinds of adults, various ways of being an adult in the world. So at a Sudbury Model School or School for Democratic Education, it's good if there's a number of staff members who have different personalities. But it's also important that those staff members care about the child, but are not judges of the child, because you can't be really honest, really genuine with somebody who's judging you. And so if you want to have a real relationship where the child is free to talk about their problems and their worries as well as show themselves off, then it's very important that the staff members at such a place not be judgmental. It's very important in home-based self-directed education that the parents not be judgmental in that sense. Free age mixing among children and adolescents is very important. Throughout history, children played not just with other children their same age, they played over a range of ages. And in that kind of play, the younger children are always learning from the older children, and the older children are learning how to be leaders and nurturers and caretakers, and they're getting a sense of their own maturity by interacting with younger children. So one of the huge mistakes we make in our typical schools is segregating children by age. We're isolating them from those other children from whom they have the most to learn. And then finally, I've put immersion in a stable, moral, caring community. Children are not designed to be raised in an isolated nuclear family. We have nuclear families, of course, and they're very important. But children need more than that. They need to be exposed to a larger community. They need to grow up with a sense of belonging in that community. And ideally, that's a community that cares about them. It could be a democratic school. It could be a neighborhood. It could be a group of relatives that are part of the extended family. But a group of people that you care about, who they care about you, and that has certain moral standards, so you grow up with a sense of, it's not just my responsibility to educate myself for my own selfish needs. It's also important for me to become educated for the purpose of being able to contribute to the larger community of which I am a part. And so I have, I think, more than used my half hour, so I'm going to stop at this point and thank you for your attention. If you have been paying attention, I can't tell. I don't know if there's time for a question or two, but I'm happy to take one or two if there is time.
Thank you for your presentation. Everybody was really enjoying it. So we have time for a quick 3 questions. I will start with a question. There are changes to legislation in the Czech Republic, including extending compulsory schooling maybe and changes in the curriculum, but the rationale for compulsory schooling and compulsory curriculum is not being questioned. What message would you have to those who are influencing these changes, like our legislators and others?
So I think that, I could go on and on with what message I would have, and I hope it would be persuasive. I think that, what could be the harm of allowing those people who choose to do something different? It's going to be a relatively small number at the beginning. Not very many parents, as it turns out, want this. I think they should want it, but they don't. So it's going to be a small number. What's the loss to the society if a few people try it out? Now, what I can say, based on experience here in the United States, is those people who try it out, it's a minority of people, do very well. They do very well in the world. So why should the state, why should the government be afraid of that? These are oftentimes people who were in some sense suffering in the regular school. They felt stilted by it. They felt bullied in it. There were many parents who take their children out for unschooling or some version of homeschooling or to join an alternative kind of school like the Sudbury Valley School are doing so because they can see their own children are suffering. To make a child who's suffering stay in that setting where they are suffering is child abuse. And the state should not be supporting child abuse.
So the second question is, do you think it is more effective to try to change the state school system or create free parallels?
I think it's more effective to create something outside of the state school system. I don't think the state, at least my experience in the United States, is that the state system is refractory to real change. You can make some small modifications in it, and I'm not against making those modifications. In fact, I work with public schools to bring more play into the school and so on. But there's a long history, both in the United States and in Europe and other places, of sort of ups and downs in changes in school. So the school gets a little bit more progressive, a little bit more freedom, a little bit more playful, and then it gets a little bit more strict, and then it goes back and forth. As long as you believe that education is the same thing for everybody and that it can be measured with tests, you really can't change the system in any meaningful way. Because that belief that everybody's supposed to learn the same things and that you can measure education with tests prevents change. In truth, education is not a race. It's not something where we're all in the same course and who comes out first and who comes out in the middle and who comes out last. Education is not a single track. It's more like a branch, like a branching tree or a bush, and every person is on a different branch. There's no way of comparing. Well, that's a stretch for the state educational system. They want something measurable, right? I've often said that the only way you can measure real education, there's really two ways you can measure a real educational system. One is, are the children happy? And if the children are not happy, then that system is not working. It should be thrown out. Any system that makes children unhappy is a bad system. The best predictor of living a happy adult life and a productive and meaningful adult life is having a happy childhood. So that's one measure. The only other measure you can use is the kind of study that I've just described. What happens with the graduates? How do they do in the world? You know, if the graduates of the schools for self-directed education were largely in prison, or they were in mental hospitals because they were driven insane, or they were unemployed and needed to be supported by the state, then the state should worry about it. But the truth is, that's not what happens. They go out and they do very well in the world. You would think that the state, the government could at least say, well, let's try a little experiment. Let's have just a small number of people. We'll permit just a small number of people to do this, and we'll follow them up for the next dozen years. And let's see how they do. And then if they do well, well, then we could open it up maybe to everybody who wants this. I mean, that would be a rational approach, right? Why not take that rational approach?
There is a debate in Czech Republic whether we can improve the public education by taking more care about special needs of children, having more assistance in the school and these things. However, in the democratic schools like Sudbury Valley, there don't seem to be any of these measures, assistance, and yet it works, and the children who leave the school, the alumni, they are not damaged by that. How would you explain that?
Yeah, so I've actually done some research. So, you know, there's an ever-growing rate of diagnosis of so-called learning disorders. So dyslexia, for example, is one of them. It's a very common disorder in terms of how it's diagnosed. And these are kids who have gone through the regular reading lessons in school and for one reason or another didn't learn how to read. And what's said about them is that they have some kind of a brain difference that prevents them from learning how to read. I think it's possible that some very small percentage of people have such a brain difference, but the great majority of people who are diagnosed as dyslexic don't really have a brain problem. They have a blocking problem. They have an emotional problem about it. They were maybe slower at learning how to read. They developed a mental block about it. One reason that I say this is I did a little study, an informal study. We need to do a more formal study, where I identified kids who had been in the regular government public school and were diagnosed with dyslexia, couldn't read. And then they were taken out of school by their parents for homeschooling. And I asked the parents in those cases, we found, I forget exactly how many, but there were something like 15 such cases. I asked the parents, well, what happened with reading ability once you took them out of school? And what I got from almost every parent was, over time, this child learned how to read. And the problem was not a cognitive problem. The problem was an emotional problem. This child hated reading. The child had learned to hate reading, to fear reading, to believe that he or she couldn't read. So what I needed to do, the parents said, is just lay off, let the child take his time, not pressure the child to read, just wait until the child, in the child's own motivation, had decided, you know, I really do kind of want to learn how to read now. And then the children learn oftentimes very quickly, sometimes relatively slowly, but more often quite quickly. So we are creating what we call learning disorders by forcing children to do things that they do not want to do in some cases, that they might not be particularly good at. And so they develop a sense of shame about it and develop an emotional resistance to it. So the point is, we would not, and then take another thing, ADHD, this is ADHD really is a description of childhood. It's, children are often inattentive. They're bouncing around. This is normal childhood. Mostly you outgrow it, but we want children to be sitting in their seats all the time, which is not natural for children. So a lot of what we call special needs are really within the realm of normal childhood. It just doesn't fit within the structure of the way the school system is organized. So if you allow children to choose their own routes and learn in their own way, learn to read when they're ready to read rather than when the school system decides they should be learning to read, you just don't find so many of those kinds of problems. Now, admittedly, there are people who do have serious problems. There are people far out on the autism spectrum. There are people with Down syndrome and so on and so forth. These are real differences. And these people do need special help. They do need special help, and we should be providing that kind of special help for people who need it.
Okay, thank you, Peter, very much. So the time is up, and we want to thank you very much for your talk, and we are going to continue our evening, and we wish you a great day.
Thank you all, and a great evening to you.
Everybody's clapping. They say hi.
Zajímám tě?
Důvěřuješ mi? Jak poznáš, co potřebuju?
A jak ses ty naučil číst?
Fórum sebeřízeného vzdělávání.